Welcome to the DBA Fundamentals Virtual Chapter Group meeting for the month of June. Today's presentation is entitled Choosing the Right Azure SQL Service for You. It will be presented by Warner Chaves. I'll be turning things over to Warner Chaves in a minute, but I have a little housekeeping to do first. My name is Kevin Wilkie, and I'm one of the new speakers for the group itself, along with Linda Gable. We just started last month. Steve and Shane have been with DBA Fundamentals for a while. That's why I wanted to join to be a speaker and presenter for them. If you have any questions on this session, please email us at dbafundamentals@sqlpass.org. All right. One of our main sponsors is SentryOne. They do a great job of actually working and giving tools for all DBAs. I know I've used their tools for a very long time. If you go to their articles or videos, they will help you a lot. Please make sure to go and download the free Plan Explorer. It is a wonderful tool for looking at Explorer at plans. They work great. I know I use it quite frequently to do any tuning. If you have any questions on or need advice to use it, then you can just go to, as the screen shows, answers.sqlperformance.com. They do a great job. People there will answer any of your questions, or you can always tweet them at SQL Sentry, on Facebook or LinkedIn, and they get back to you rather quickly. We also have a new sponsor, DB Watch. I have not actually had a chance to use their software, but I know my group and I am actually working on getting access to it, and we will soon at least be looking through it to look at it for ourselves. It seems to be a great product. The little bit I've seen of it, but obviously, like everybody else, I'd like to look at it more. So we can find more information at dbwatch.com. All right, the virtual group news. So with DBA Fundamentals, we have Shane and Steve who have been doing it for a while, like I said. As you see, their Twitter handle is on the screen. Also, there is mine and Glenda's Twitter handle if you'd like to get access to us. Please remember also that we actually have, getting ready for the PASS Summit 2018, we actually show there on the screen our discount code, where you'll get $150 off for the year for PASS Summit 2018. Also, if you actually use these codes, you will actually be in the giveaway for a $1,000 Amazon gift card. First, second, and third place, obviously, as listed, are $1,000, $500, and $300. To get actual access to that, to be able to be eligible for that, obviously you have to use the code. You also must be a member of PASS. You must be a member of the DBA Fundamentals virtual group. You must follow us on Twitter at DBA Fun. You must be subscribed to dbafuntube.org, which is our YouTube channel. And that's it. That's as simple as it gets. So with that, you also must remember that on June 29th, $300 will be added to the cost of Summit for the year. Sorry, I keep saying for the year for some reason. Summit itself will actually cost $300 more than it costs now, so I believe it'll be up to $21.99, almost $2,200. With the codes that you see listed on the screen there, that'll actually drop to almost $2,050. But still, it's $300 more than what you'd pay right now. And remember, that's on June 29th, so you have a few more days before that goes into effect. Upcoming SQL Saturdays. There are a few coming up here rather soon. You see there in the U.S., it's Houston, Iowa, Louisville, Sacramento, Albany, and Columbus. We have some in different countries around the world. Obviously, find some in your area. If there's obviously a lot more, because we're up to, I know, over 800 SQL Saturdays that we've had or will be having come later this year. If you go to SQLSaturday.com, you can find an event near you, just to be, so you'll have all the information available. Upcoming virtual group webinars. As you see on the screen, we have a number of virtual group webinars rather soon for us. On July 17th, we'll be having top 7 things a new DBA should know with John Martin. One of the ones that coming up on August 7th is one I'm very excited for, the Fundamentals of Design with Gail Shaw. On August 21st with Jennifer McCown is beginning admin the care and feeding of the SQL Server itself, which will be a great help for the newbie DBAs as well as help for the older ones, the more experienced ones. That's how we say it in this world. On September 18th with Charles Kim is Linux Fundamentals for SQL Server DBAs. Also, I want to actually push the Women in Technology group. That is a wonderful group for females, actually for everyone, who's really who it's for, because they do some great sessions. I'm friends with most of the people who actually do this group, and it's really helpful. It helps a lot of people in a lot of ways. They talk about a lot of great subjects. Anyway, as I've said before, and want to remind everyone, on June 29th, we'll actually go up $300 for CASA Summit. So if you're going to pay for it, now would be the time before that cost increase comes into effect. For the past virtual groups, as you see here, this is most of the ones that we actually have for virtual groups. There are a few more, but you see we do a lot of different languages, a lot of different topics. There's some on PowerShell, infrastructure itself, professional development, which is a great virtual group. You name it, it's there. Some virtual group will talk with you about anything you have available. Oh, look, yet again, just as a reminder, on June 29th, cost of summit goes up $300. Just something to remember. And with that, something to remember is that this recording will actually be available within 1 to 2 days on the DBA Fundamentals website at fundamentals.sqlpass.org meeting archive or dbafund.org. That will be available here in the next few days once we complete this session. So with that, I turn it over to Warner. Turning you.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. I think
no
you can
problem.
make me the presenter.
Yep.
And hopefully you guys can see everything good.
I sure can.
All right. Perfect. So thank you guys for joining us today all around the world, wherever you are. Another session for the DBA Fundamentals chapter. Today we're going to talk about choosing the right Azure SQL service. Allow me to introduce myself real quick. My name is Warren Chavez. I'm a DBA and consultant. I've been working with Microsoft products, obviously SQL Server mostly, for the last 11 years. I used to work at HP. I work now at a managed services and consulting company called Pythian that's based out of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I am very honored to be a Microsoft Data Platform MVP as well. You guys can check out my personal blog at SQLturbo.com. You can shoot me an email. You can find me on Twitter as well, or LinkedIn. Those are my contact is right there here on the slide deck. Also, check out our Pythian.com, our technical blog in my company. It's not just Microsoft. We have a lot of other stuff, other technologies, big data, data science, and so on. All right. Okay, let's talk about today. So the goal here is to go over the different models for Azure SQL Database that Microsoft has introduced and find out how they fit with each other and what is the best way to use them, when to pick one against the other. Obviously, Microsoft has been putting tons of investment into Azure, and this also means that they have created a lot of different offerings for when you just want a SQL database, right? So it's important to know when to use which one. So we're going to cover the different models that they have and the different offerings. We're going to see what's in common for most of them. We're going to see what's different between each other. We're going to say have some kind of questionnaire type of Q&A questions so you can find the best match for whatever you're trying to do. And obviously, we're going to have a couple of demos. I want to show you guys the portal experience for creating the different models of databases and how they're different in terms of what you get when you create them and what you're paying for when you create them. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to show you guys the managed instance, which is the model, the latest model that is right now in preview, where you have a full instance of Azure SQL DB managed by Microsoft. So I'm going to show you guys what the preview looks like right now and some of the interesting ways in which the preview works. So you can see, before it goes GA and see if it's something that is of interest to you and probably something that you might use in the future. All right. So the scope for today, I really only assume that you know either a little bit of SQL Server or a little bit of Azure SQL Database. If you are a guru on SQL Server, but you just haven't had the chance to actually explore what Azure has in the cloud, then this session will be useful for you as well, because basically I'm going to tell you what is the menu that Microsoft has in the cloud and when you should pick one over the other. Okay. So let's check out the story so far in terms of the history of SQL-related offerings in the cloud for Azure. So the first one was the Azure SQL Database individual model, and it was released in 2010. So it's already been 8 years since this product has been out here in the market. Now, initially when it was released in 2010, it was released with two tiers that were called Web and Business. And these two tiers were 100% based on size. I believe web was something like 10 gigs max or something like that, and business was something like 200 gigs max or something like that. And that's it. You didn't really get any reservations in terms of performance. And as the cloud adoption was growing and they were collecting feedback from clients, it was very apparent to the Microsoft team that nobody wants to deploy a database without having any sort of SLA or commitment from the provider in terms of performance, right? So it took them 4 years to introduce the performance-based tiers in 2014, which is the model that we have right now when people talk about an Azure SQL Database Basic, a Standard, or Premium. These are the performance-based tiers, where you're basically not only you create a database that has a maximum specific size, but they also have a certain amount of CPU or memory or I/O characteristics tied to them, right? So that was in 2014. Then the next evolution was released in 2015, and it's called Elastic Pools. And Elastic Pools allow you to grab a bunch of databases and share resources with them. And we'll go into detail into what all these different models are later on the slide deck, of course. But for now, it's just to see the timeline, how quickly some of these has accelerated, right? It took 4 years between 2010 to 2014 to see a big change in the performance-based tiers being introduced, and after that has been a lot of new stuff coming out. So Elastic Pools came out in 2015. Then in 2016 we got Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which is the managed offering for really large data warehouses. And then now this year, 2018, we have Azure SQL Managed Instance, which is in public preview right now, and it should be going out to the general availability later on this year, right? So a lot of work, a lot of investment that Microsoft is doing, of course, and keep in mind, this goes hand in hand with a lot of the new stuff that comes out in SQL Server, right? So a lot of the new stuff will go out first in Azure, gets tested in Azure, people use it in Azure, and then it goes into the retail SQL Server product. So let's talk about the 3 SQL database models. So these are the models that are for SQL databases. They are not really for data warehousing, okay? So the first model, like I said, is the individual model of Azure SQL Database. So this model, you basically just create single databases and then you assign a tier based on the performance that you want and the size, right? So you can go from very small basic, which is 5 gig max, all the way now today to premium. I think the maximum premium right now is about 4 terabytes, which is very, very big, right? And considering you can use column store, you could even make that you could have 4 terabytes compressed, could end up being 10 terabytes uncompressed, right? So even though it's just for single databases, they have grown it to the point where you can put some pretty beefy stuff up there, right? It is cloud first fork of SQL Server. So what that means, like I said, is that Microsoft will work on the code for Azure SQL Database, and then they incorporate that back into SQL Server. We actually saw that with some of the releases of some of the newest features, for example, like dynamic data masking, row level security, always encrypted. All these features were actually first in Azure SQL Database. They were in Azure SQL Database for several months before they were introduced on the box in SQL Server. For example, for SQL 2017, we had Graph Database, and Graph Database was actually these T-SQL extensions were available in Azure SQL DB way before they were available in SQL 2017, right? The databases in the Azure SQL DB single model are highly isolated from each other. So this is something that is very different from when people are coming from SQL Server on-prem, right? In SQL Server on-prem, if I have database A and database B under the same server, then I can say something like, I'm connected to database A, but if I have permissions, I can just do, select star from database B dot DBO dot table X, right? And it works. So the databases are not highly isolated from each other. In Azure SQL DB single model, one database pretty much has no knowledge of any other databases that it's actually sharing the server with, right? It's very highly isolated from each other. They do not share any sort of security information. They don't share any metadata information. If you are connected to one, you actually can't just say use, like how in SQL Server you can do, you're connected to database A and you say use database B, and if you have access to it, you will just switch databases inside the same connection. That does not work in Azure SQL Database single model. You have to disconnect and reconnect to the database that you actually want, right? And because it is a fully managed service, if you're not familiar with the term of database as a service, well, pretty much what that means is that Microsoft is handling all the infrastructure, right? You don't have to worry about Windows or hardware or storage or anything. They manage all the backups for your database. They manage the high availability. And if you want to pay for the disaster recovery option, which is called geo-replication, then they also manage that for you, right? The whole point is that as a developer, you don't have to worry about any of the admin tasks, of course, and you just have to develop. And as an administrator, really the two biggest points that you become responsible for are security and performance, right? So it really simplifies your job if you are a DBA in terms of you don't have to worry anymore about the actual infrastructure, the backups, the HA or the DR. Maybe you can just focus on code reviewing, you can focus on design, you can focus on performance, you can focus on security and so on, right? And this Azure SQL Database single model is kind of like the core of the other models that are for not data warehousing, right? Oh, and also here, Microsoft controls all the features enabled. So for example, that is sometimes is an issue because sometimes it's happened one time in the past where they actually did disable one feature. So they had CLR, which was enabled in Azure SQL Database at the very beginning. And then for security reasons, they had to take it out after the fact. You can still get it actually if you call support, but they took it out, let's say from like automatically having it. If you do need it, you can call support and they'll review the DLL that you need on the CLR, and then they'll help you get it up and going. But it's not transparent anymore because they found that I guess they couldn't really security review automatically all the possible DLLs that people could upload to Azure SQL DB, which is also the reason why they came up with managed instance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So the second model about Azure SQL DB is when they introduced, like I said, the elastic pools, right? So in the elastic pool model, the underlying databases are all still Azure SQL Database. So they all have all the same characteristics that I just mentioned for the Azure SQL Database single model. The reason why they created Elastic Pool is that they wanted to maximize the efficiency of resource sharing. So when you're creating an Azure SQL DB in the individual model, you're always reserving the same amount of resources. But that's also, let's say, could be wasteful because maybe you don't have as many users for a third of the day. Maybe 2/3 of your day are really busy, and then the other third you don't have a lot of users that are actually using your database, right? So those resources are kind of going to waste. So they came up with the idea of Elastic Pool as a way to group different databases together in a way that you could just say, I want resources for this pool, and all the databases have those resources available. So the idea is that when one database is idle, then of course another database hopefully is busy, and then the pool itself gets high usage, even though the databases might be idle during different times of the day, right? One thing to keep in mind about the Elastic Pool is that it is not a way to logically connect databases. So the databases, they are still highly isolated. They still don't talk to each other transparently. They still don't know about the other databases. They are still, you have to handle their security individually, right? It is not, doesn't mean that because you put them in an elastic pool, it is the same as having them in under the same instance in SQL Server, for example, right? Which is like the reference that most people use when they think about putting databases together, right? It doesn't work like that. You are not connecting them logically by putting them inside the same pool. All you are doing is letting them share compute resources, right? So the ideal use case for Elastic Pool, of course, is if you have many databases, but they have performance spikes at different times, right? If you have many databases, but they all have performance spikes at the same time, then Elastic Pool is not really going to work well for you because let's say you provisioned 100 units of compute for an elastic pool and you have 5 databases and all of them are gonna spike and use 40 at the same time, then you're still gonna go way over your limit, right? The idea there would be that 1 or 2 would go up to 50 while the other ones are idle and so on, right? The whole goal of Elastic Pool is to keep the pool really busy, but they can only do that if the databases are spiking at different times, right? If they're all spiking at the same time, then you might want to look at either reorganizing with other databases you have into different pools, or they might just be better fit to leave them in the single model. Now, finally, we come to the latest addition. We don't know if it's the last, but it's definitely the latest addition to the family of Azure SQL offerings, which is Managed Instance, right? So Managed Instance, like I said, it's in public preview right now. The underlying databases, they are still Azure SQL DB. So just because it's a managed instance, it does not mean that it's just a SQL server with some automation scripts built on top of it. That's not really what it is. It is still using the Azure SQL database, fabric and platform and so on, right? The big difference for sure is that it is way more compatible with SQL Server. So we're gonna see later on basically the second half of the presentation, we are going to focus on the biggest differences with managed instance because this is the latest offering coming out and definitely the one that is a little bit more different than the other ones. So we're going to be focusing on managed instance in the second half of the session. So I'm not going to go into huge detail about how it's a lot more different or how it maximizes compatibility with SQL because we are going to look at that in detail later on. Now, the biggest difference for sure is that the databases inside the instance, they are not highly isolated, right? So this is a big difference from the single model and the elastic pool model, where putting them under the same server did not really connect them logically. In managed instance, putting them inside the managed instance does connect them logically, like you would inside a SQL Server on-prem, for example. And then some of the features that are unsafe in the other models, for example, I just mentioned CLR, they are allowed inside the instance model because the instance is, let's say, the container of isolation. So some of them will be allowed. For example, we have other things like service broker. Service broker is not on single DB model or elastic pools, but it will be in Azure SQL Managed Instance. And it's similar, one similarity that it does have to elastic pools is that the resources are shared by all databases as well, right? So in this case, same thing applies. If all your databases are spiking at the same time, then you're gonna have to have some reserved capacity to deal with those spikes because they're all sharing resources, right? The only one that has truly dedicated for a single database resource is the single DB model, right? The core Azure SQL DB single DB model. All right, so let's talk about what it means when we're saying that they're all cloud first, right? So Azure SQL DB, it is not a direct version that compares to SQL, right? It's not like you can say, oh, Azure SQL Database under the covers, it's just SQL Server 2017 CU1 or something like that. It doesn't really have a one-to-one exact map to SQL Server, right? Another advantage of the cloud first model, you will see new compatibility levels activated on Azure SQL DB before they are available on SQL Server. So that means, for example, if the team pushes some new optimizer fixes or they improve the adaptive query optimizer features, then you'll probably see those activated on the cloud first fork, which means Azure SQL DB, before we see them on SQL. New features activated before SQL as well, things like Azure Threat Detection, the intelligent insights. These features are still only in the cloud, and we'll see if they come to SQL Server or not. And managed instance is not really matching SQL Server versions, but it is the closest that we can get to a particular SQL version, right? So even to the latest version of SQL, you can take a backup of it and restore it on managed instance. So that gives you that level of compatibility that you didn't have in the other models. In the other model, in Azure SQL DB, that is not managed instance, you cannot, for example, you cannot just restore a backup. It doesn't let you do that. All right, so some of the platform characteristics that are the same in all of them. So Microsoft is introducing a new model for provisioning managed instance. Is based on virtual cores. So you have to pick a certain amount of virtual cores, and this gives you a certain amount of RAM per core, and also gives you a certain amount of storage that you can use and speed of the storage for that managed instance. Azure SQL DB for many years now has been using what's called DTUs, which is called database transaction units, which was like a blended measure of CPU and RAM and IO all combined to one number. So you would provision something that was 100 DTUs, and then if you provision something that's 200 DTUs, then you would know it's double the performance for that database, right? But they are going to be bringing the virtual core model to Azure SQL Database individual as well. So soon, Azure SQL DB will allow not only the DTU model, but will also allow the virtual core model. Now, because they're all running on the Azure SQL DB platform, regardless of which one of these you pick, all the infrastructure, all the patching is managed by Microsoft. So again, that's none of your responsibility. Same thing, the backup, DHA or the DR, they are managed by Microsoft, regardless of which one of these models you select. And you will be using the Azure SQL DB database code under the covers, like I mentioned before. And of course, one of the biggest promises of the cloud is to be flexible to scale up and down. That doesn't change in any of them, either whether you're using Azure SQL DB single model, or whether you're using Elastic Pool, or whether you're using Managed Instance, you always have the option to scale up or scale down the offering that you select, right? Now I'm going to make a small stop here and talk about the data warehouse. I'm not going to make a big part of the presentation talking about the data warehouse, because I find for most people it's really obvious when to pick the Azure SQL DBs or pick Azure SQL Data Warehouse compared to selecting from all the other flavors of Azure SQL DB, which are a lot more similar between each other, right? But I still find that, in order to really give you guys a good overview and complete the vision, that we should cover just a little bit of data warehouse. So Azure SQL Data Warehouse was introduced, like I said, in 2016, and it is an MPP solution for data warehousing. So MPP means massively parallel processing, and what it basically means is that it's multiple machines working together to do the processing of the data, right? And that is really the core difference between SQL DB and SQL Data Warehouse. Is the SQL Data Warehouse is a distributed system with multiple nodes having different chunks of the data warehouse, right? So because it is amongst multiple nodes, it can do both parallel loading and parallel reading, right? Using a technology that some of you may have heard from SQL Server called Polybase that can do really efficient file loading. It does this in parallel to all the different nodes in the data warehouse. And then when you query, you can also query amongst all the different nodes in the data warehouse. And this happens transparently to you, right? You send the query to the data warehouse, and the data warehouse creates a distributed execution plan to resolve your query, even if the data is on multiple nodes. DW is also fully managed. So again, you don't have to deal with infrastructure. You don't have to deal with patching. Microsoft does the backups, DHA, and the DR. In this case, it's geo restoring, right? So you can restore your data warehouse to a different region in the event of a disaster. Now, there is a caveat for Azure SQL DW, and it's that it is not 100% T-SQL or data type compatible. So to give you guys an example, just a couple of examples, the merge T-SQL statement is not on SQL DW yet. I don't know if they're working on it, but it's not there yet. And for example, some of the CLR data types, that means XML or hierarchy, or spatial data types, they are not available on SQL DW either. Same as the other offerings though, you can always have it to be elastic and flexible. You can scale it up and down, and Azure SQL DW also allows you to pause. So you can actually pause your data warehouse and just pay for storage. And if you need to use it again, you just boot it up and start working with it. So this is very useful. For example, if you don't have a data warehouse that is truly 24/7, you can get a bit of savings by pausing it when it's not being actively used, okay? All right, so let's jump here out of the slides for a bit and walk through the portal experience for creating the different flavors of SQL databases. And I'll show you guys the different tiers, kind of like what they're offering with them and so on. So let me just jump right here to my client, and hopefully you guys will see the Azure homepage right now. So I'm just gonna do a quick demo here. If I just go for search for SQL database, then I'll land here on the different databases that I have. I just have one database online for demo, but here I just want to show you the experience when you add one. Really, I just want to focus here on the stuff that you select or that you get when you pick from it, right? So for example, let's talk if you wanted to just create one on the single model. You can see here where it actually asks you, do you want to use SQL Elastic Pool or not, right? So obviously, if you just want to create one database that has resources dedicated, you just have to pick not now. Then when you do that, then you get into the pricing tiers, and these pricing tiers will correspond to the single database model. So let me go up here at the top, and you see we have 3 different models. We have basic, standard, and premium. Basic, like it says here, is for less demanding workloads. In my opinion, basic is really for dev, test, and playing around. It should not be used for production. Microsoft does have it here. It says for most production workloads, use standard. I agree with that. I think for any production workload, you should start at standard. And then premium is mostly for IO intensive workloads. Premium machines are well known for having a lot more RAM in terms of the database that you get compared to standard. So if you have queries that are a lot more intensive for IO, premium makes a big difference because you get a lot more RAM, right? So you can see here standard, for example, max size of standard is 250 gigs, which is pretty good. And if I go to premium, let's see, premium, it's 1 terabyte right now, the max data size. And you can see here, we have this slider that mentioned the database transaction units, which is how we provision, like I said, is a blended measure of CPU, memory, and IO. And you can move it up and down depending on how much you think you need, all the way to, the max 4,000. Actually, if you pick the max, you can see the size of the database also goes up to the maximum right now for premium, it's 4 terabytes. Okay, so let me close that down. And I'm going to show you guys if we pick Elastic Pool instead. So I just switch here just to say, yeah, I want to do Elastic Pool. Then this changes into Elastic Database Pool. We have to add a pool. And then we're going to be able to see the different configurations for the pool. So you guys see there's a bit of differences here. So it says pool settings. So the max data size here is now for an entire pool of databases, right? So we're in standard at this point, and we see the max is 750 GBs. This is shared on all the databases of the pool, right? The moment we move into the Elastic Pool model, the resources are shared. And then when we see here, we see this eDTUs. Again, those are Elastic DTUs. It just means those are shared resources for the databases. And something else that you can do per database, it means that when you put a database inside the pool, you can actually say, well, each database can only consume up to an X amount here of DTUs. So you can see here, if I make a pool that has, let's see, what's the max? 3,000 DTUs, but I have a database max to 100 DTUs, then it means up to 30 databases could be consuming their max at a single moment in time, right? All right, then I'll show you guys what it looks like for the preview, which is the managed instance. Let me search here. Maybe it's managed instance. There it is. So let's see if I want to add one. Let's see. I already have one up and running. I created before for a session, but let's see. Here, I'll show you guys the different pricing tiers of managed instance. Oh, do I have to fill this up? Okay. Everybody just picks the same test name. Okay. That's good. All right. Oh, it doesn't do copy paste. Create new. Let's see. All right, all of that just to get the pricing tier thing unlocked so I can show you guys. Okay, so you can see here the model, the difference of the model, right? Remember the other ones had sliders for DTUs. They will also get this vCore model eventually. But right now only managed instance is working with this vCore model. So you guys can see, for example, here, general purpose is the only tier that's available right now. However, they are going to have another tier in the future called business critical. And we're going to look in detail in a little bit on the slides about the different tiers that are coming. Then compute generation, they have Gen 4 and Gen 5. Basically, Gen 5 gives you better performance if you need it compared to Gen 4. And then you get the vCores that you can have per instance. I can bump this all the way up to 24 virtual cores or go all the way down to 8 virtual cores. And then I have certain amount of storage that I can add to this particular instance all the way to 8 terabytes, right? 8,000 gigabytes. Now, if you guys see here, for now, we have 7 days of backup retention included. It says enjoy free trial during the public preview, so we don't really know if after the public preview how much the backup retention is going to be, right? But something else that is kind of interesting and very useful in terms of migrating to Azure is that if you migrate to managed instance right now, if you see here, if you have SQL Server with software insurance, you can actually will get a 30% discount if you move to managed instance. So your managed instance costs will be a lot less because you're basically saying, hey, I want to migrate my on-prem SQL to managed instance. And so they'll give you a discount accordingly so that you're basically not paying for the licensing part of managed instance. Okay, cool. So I hope that's a pretty good overview, at least in terms of all you can do in the portal and the different deployment methods for the different flavors. We're gonna keep moving along here. So let's talk about the managed instance. The provisioning model, like I mentioned, is very different compared to the Azure SQL DB, where it was all about DTUs. Now we're gonna have this virtual core-based model. Now you get a certain amount of cores, you get a certain amount of RAM per core, and you also get not only the max storage size, but you also have a certain amount of max storage IOPS, right? So the more money you spend on your managed instance, of course, the faster in terms of capacity your storage is going to be. Now you also get that Azure hybrid benefit, which is that discount that I just showed you guys in the portal. That means if you are paying for SQL Server with software assurance on-prem, you can move it to the cloud and get that 30% discount on your managed instance cost. Up to 8 terabytes of storage, like we just saw. And right now there is a limit of 100 databases per instance. I have clients that have a lot more than 100 databases per instance, so it remains to be seen whether Microsoft will push this limit up or not in the future. For now, though, it is 100 databases per instance. Okay. Now, I mentioned before, and like when we saw in the portal, right now it only has the option for general purpose. However, we do know they are working on a higher tier for managed instance that is going to come. It's called business critical, right? So we are going to have both general purpose and business critical. Business critical is going to have local SSDs. General purpose is going to be network SSDs. So latency is going to be a lot lower in business critical. Business critical is going to give you 200,000 max IOPS. General purpose is going to tap out at 7,000 IOPS. Business critical is going to have 3 replicas, including the ability to do read scale. So you can do reporting, let's say, one of both those replicas. For now, general purpose is only 1 replica for high availability and does not let you do read workloads on it. And finally, the last difference that I saw is that business critical is going to support in-memory OLTP, whereas general purpose is not going to support it. Okay. Now, let's talk about some of the specific features. Remember, I mentioned that managed instance increases the compatibility a lot more with SQL Server compared to Azure SQL DB. So this is where we can cover this in detail. So managed instance is going to allow 3-part name queries. That's where I mentioned, having database A, being able to do select from database B.dbo.table name. So that's going to be allowed in managed instance. Managed instance is also going to have full virtual network isolation. So unlike Azure SQL DB, where you get a public internet endpoint, in managed instance, you can actually place your managed instance inside a virtual network and it remains unroutable from outside that virtual network, unless you wanted to expose it. A SQL agent, for example, is going to be available in managed instance. SQL agent is not available in the single model of Azure SQL Database. So if you're thinking of migrating a server that has a bunch of jobs, well, then it probably will be a lot easier to migrate to managed instance. You can backup, restore from SQL Server from managed instance. It allows SQL CLR, service broker, change data capture. And one little detail there, you can actually initiate backups on your own too, but they can only be copy-only backups. They are not going to allow you to take a full or a log or a differential, because if you were able to do that, you could screw up with Microsoft's own backup management, right? So they don't want to give you access to basically shoot yourself in the foot. So you're only allowed to take full copy-only backups, okay? Now, if we talk about managed instance versus SQL, well, the high availability is already managed inside managed instance, right? So you will not be able to create, let's say, an availability group inside managed instance because all those features are already managed by Microsoft. Physical path commands are removed because the storage is managed for you and you don't have direct access to the storage. So you will not be able to do something like a restore with move and pick a specific path. It uses Azure Active Directory as opposed to using Windows Authentication because it's obviously living in the cloud inside Azure. This makes sense. There is no buffer pool extensions in managed instance. And features that usually reference local storage, like SQL audit or bulk inserting from a file or backup and restore, they all only work with blob storage because obviously in the cloud, it has to assume that we're not working with the local storage, but the only storage that is always available is the cloud storage, right? So all these different features work with blob storage instead. For now, it is using the current SQL Server default collation, which is that one that's on the screen there, the Latin case insensitive, access sensitive, and at least for now, it cannot be changed. I would assume this is going to change. Probably this might be a limitation only for the preview. In order to support, many geographies and all types of languages around the world, I assume this is going to be changed as this managed instance moves into general availability. All right, so just show you guys real quick the managed instance that I already have provisioned, and we're gonna look at some of the funky things that we get from it. So I'm connected right now here to managed instance, and if you guys here, I'm just gonna run a select add version, and you can see here it does not give me a SQL Server version. It does give you Microsoft SQL Azure and the current version number for SQL Azure. Something interesting as well in terms of resources, if I go to the properties of managed instance, you guys see here, it says processors 24, and it says memory 172 gigs. However, that is not the amount of resources that are available for my managed instance. What's happening here is that the managed instance has been created inside a virtual machine that Microsoft manages, and these are the resources that Microsoft has made available for the virtual machine, but they're not the resources that they have made available for my managed instance, remember? So let's see, for example, here, if I say select from the scheduler count, how many visible schedulers I have, I actually have 8, right? Even though I know just based on the properties view that there's 24 underlying cores, because I only paid for 8, they are only giving me these 8 schedulers visible online. Now I can look into some of the other DMVs and see, yeah, CPU count is 8, and the physical memory, here's the 176 gigs that we saw in the properties, but the target is only 52 gigs instead, right? So there is a smaller amount of actual memory that I can use. And even if I go and query like performance counters, this is something else that's different on managed instance. Managed instance gives you access to the SQL Server performance counters. Here I can see the same value, right? I get this 52 gigs. And if I execute here from a DM job object, you can see here I also have the amount of memory that I can get total for SQL. And you guys can see here, this is where the difference comes into play. It says non-SQL OS memory. So basically what's happening here is that in managed instance, this this instance is being given 57 gigs. And out of those 57 gigs, the process here that runs managed instance is reserving 6 gigs for SQL Server over the max server memory, right? So the max server memory is this number that we're going to get here. And then we add those other 6 gigs, and then we get to this other number here, right? So all that is accounted for to give you a little bit of extra memory beyond the max server memory is accounted for by the managed instance config that Microsoft is using, right? Now, I already restored a backup earlier today, so you guys can see, for example, here, if you want to be able to migrate using backup and restore to managed instance, you will have to put it inside a Azure Blob account, and you're going to have to use shared access signatures is the way that you can access it. After you have created your credential that tells managed instance how to connect to your Blob storage account, then you can actually just do a restore database from URL. You guys can see how I did this with the AdventureWorks 2017 back file. So this is literally a backup file from SQL Server. I'm able to restore it transparently into managed instance. And if I connect here to managed instance, so I can just go to use AdventureWorks, and the moment I restore it, it no longer tells me it's Azure's Microsoft SQL Server 2017. It actually has changed the server version now to Microsoft SQL Azure. Same thing, right? Now it's become an Azure SQL database. And something very interesting as well, of course, if I do something like select star from sys database files, we can see now the different files from the database, they're no longer local paths, right? You guys see here? This has changed to blob storage that is managed by Microsoft, right? I don't have access to them. However, based on how much I'm paying for general purpose or business critical, they will give me faster or slower blob storage objects so that I get more or less IO from my managed instance. And then, for example, we can see something here as well. We have this file stream file group that has been restored as well. That was part of the AdventureWorks 2017. All right, and that's pretty much it for managed instance. Like I said, in terms of data compatibility, Microsoft is making it as transparent as they can, the point that you can actually restore a backup now into managed instance. However, there are some more limitations of managed instance that they're really not really able to go into the whole list of them, but there are some things that are not enabled. For example, if I wanted to create a SQL agent job, I can only create a T-SQL job for now. I can't create a PowerShell job, for example, or I can't create a command line job, for example, because those types of jobs are not supported at the moment. And I mean, for example, I can see PowerShell being supported in the future, but I don't think that will ever allow you to run a command line job inside managed instance, because then you would be able to do many things to the VM, and Microsoft needs to be able to save you from crashing your own managed instance, right? All right, so let's finish up here. When to use each one. So do you need, well, there's a list of features that are not available in Azure SQL DB, right? Like, let's say change data capture. So if you need a feature that is not available in Azure SQL DB and it is available in managed instance, then obviously managed instance is your only choice if you want to go for a managed service. If you are migrating from SQL Server, or are you starting a new development? If you're migrating an instance that you have on premises of SQL, then managed instance is a lot easier for migration. If you're starting new development, then you can decide whether you want to go single model elastic pool or you want to stay with managed instance. Let's say you're a software as a service provider, and then chargeback accuracy is very important for your client database costs. You want to pass the cost of each client's database exactly as it is back down to them. In that case, single database model is the most accurate because you're not sharing resources with anybody, right? So you will be able to really accurately tell where the cost is going for databases for each particular database, right? If you're looking for a high isolation for security or compliance reasons, but you do want to share resources, then Elastic Pools then is a good choice for what you're trying to do. Now, in terms of, you're thinking, well, maybe I have a need to use SQL Data Warehouse or not. Well, if you're planning something like a 10 terabyte plus data warehouse, then definitely SQL Data Warehouse is the best one for long-term large data warehouses that are going to continue growing. If you're thinking of something smaller, like a 1 to 5 terabyte data mart, then Azure SQL Database Premium could be a good choice because it gives you full T-SQL compatibility. Obviously, this is assuming that you're going to be using column store indexes inside Azure SQL Database, right? That's really the key to be able to do data marts in Azure SQL Database, is to really leverage column store indexing. And then if you really need fast data loading for large amounts of data, then you definitely want to go with SQL Data Warehouse, because it uses Polybase, and it'll be a lot faster loading in parallel with Polybase than loading Azure SQL DB through like something like SSIS or Azure Data Factory or so on. All of those will not be as fast as loading through Polybase. All right. Okay. So that's pretty much what I had for today, and we still got 5 minutes. So if we have some questions, we can go over them now.
Awesome. We do have a few questions. First of all, I did want to say thank you very much. You gave a great, well-rounded presentation about Azure SQL. So a couple of questions. Let's see. Does Managed SQL include SSRS? If not, is there a virtual machine image that's configured for scalable and reliable SSRS deployment in Azure?
So that's a really good question. Managed instance is literally that. It's just a SQL instance. It does not come with SSRS, SSAS, or SSIS. Microsoft wants you to use, stop thinking about SQL being this box that does everything, and instead pick different cloud services, right? So right now, if you wanted analysis services, we have SSAS in the cloud now, fully managed. We have Azure Data Factory can run SSIS. And now to your point, unfortunately, SSRS is the one that has not received the as a service treatment. And it seems that Microsoft really is pushing people to try not to think about the more static SSRS reports and move into something like Power BI. To the point of whether there's an image of SSRS, I really don't know if there is already a pre-built image. But right now, if you do need to do SSRS, you don't really have a choice other than to do exactly that. You will need to run a VM and load SSRS on your own, unfortunately.
Okay. Another question, is M available on DW, the initial M? I'm not really sure what he was talking about myself.
I don't know what is M either. If you can, is it we're talking about Power Query, the loading? Then if that's what it is, then it is not. But we
Yes,
can.
that's what he said. Yes.
Okay, so if that's so if that's what we're talking about, then no, it's not available on DW. DW, basically, if you want to transform anything with DW, you would have to do it with T-SQL only. The other option would be that you would transform it with some other service. For example, if you had some files that you would want to transform with something like Data Lake Analytics, then you could do that. Or if you needed to transform them, what else could you use? If it's like an actual scalable thing, you could use Azure Data Factory, for example, but M in particular, no, that's still in the domain of Power BI.
Okay. And oldest database compatibility level you can restore to Managed Instance?
That's a really good question. I haven't tested the oldest one. I would assume not the star. Don't take this as gospel, but because it goes all the way to the latest version of SQL, I would assume that it can do the same, right? And if we go back to what SQL can do today, you can restore all the way back to a 2005 backup, but when you do that, it gives you compatibility level to 2008, right? So if I take a backup today of 2005 and restore to 2017, it ends up restoring fine, but ends up with compatibility level 100. I'm gonna test it now after this because now I'm thinking myself, but I think it's probably the same, right? It makes
Okay.
sense to me that it would be the same. Keep in mind, Microsoft wants everybody to migrate to the cloud, right? So I would be really surprised if they don't, if they made it harder for managed instance as opposed to just, supporting the same, old databases that you might have lying around in SQL 2005 and still made them restorable on managed instance.
Okay. Does Azure SQL Data Warehouse support partition tables?
It does, but you have to be really careful with it because DW already partitions your data on something called distributions, right? So even if your table is not partitioned, it's still gonna split it into distributions, and it uses 60 distributions under the covers. So let's assume that you have a partition table that is partitioned daily. So on an on-prem SQL, you would have 365 partitions, right? But when you load it into Azure SQL DW, because it also uses the 60 distributions, then you can do the math there, right? No longer do you have 365 partitions, you have 60 times 365 partitions, right? So in Azure SQL DW, you only use partitioning for your really, really, really big fact tables. You have to be careful when you do it so that you don't overdo it, and the tables do have to be a lot bigger. Usually you wouldn't go with something like daily, you would go with something like monthly or even quarterly partitions, okay?
Okay. And one more really quick one, and then I have another one that is going to require some more in-depth, so I'll pass you their information along. Is the merge available in the managed instance service?
Yeah, managed instance is 100% T-SQL compatible. So in terms of what you can do with T-SQL, managed instance is 100% compatible. It's DW the one that has a few gaps here and there.
Okay, awesome. And like I said, I have one more that I'll make sure I email it to you because he's looking for a little bit more in depth, and we're already 2 minutes past over. So.
No worries, that's fine.
All right, awesome. Everybody, thank you very much for coming. Make sure you get our contact information at dbafund.org. You can also check our upcoming meetings. Speaking of which, today is the last meeting that we have that applies to the contest. So make sure that you are a past member, that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel and our Twitter account. And this one and anything else you've done in the first 6 months of the year, all sessions will be a new basically ticket in for those Amazon gift cards, one with 1,000, one 500, and one 300. You can also check out our YouTube channel for the recordings of this one as well as past ones at dbafundtube.org. And also one last reminder, just to make sure, June 29th, the past summit price increases by $300. So $300 to make sure you guys get your tickets in early. We do have our discount code, which I know is on the site, as well as emails that you get and all of that. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day and see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.